I reminded him that any preacher worth their salt takes more than 6 minutes to say good morning to people. And the truth is, it took Steve a long time to break the record that he did this year, so we might as well mingle here for a little while or so. Long time. You've heard from players and coaches and former players tonight who talked to you about Steve as Coach Knight, and I figured my job tonight was to tell you how he got to be where he is. Growing up with 4 brothers in our household, 5 boys, Steve was the second oldest child, and he was very, very sickly as a young boy. He did serve as a poster child for Let's Stamp Out Malnutrition in America in our lifetime. He really was about this big around. His nickname, if you didn't know it, is Bone. Not Bones, because it couldn't be plural. He was too little for us to use a plural form of that. So he was Bone growing up the whole time, and he was allergic to all kinds of things. He had to drink goat's milk, which when we ever made the mistake of pulling that out of the fridge, we always were very regretful of that. Steve had asthma when he was growing up, and his doctor had invented this special breathing treatment thing. Nowadays they have all these fancy things that you can use. Well, this doctor invented this thing, it's the truth, it's a bicycle pump with medicine attached to it and a mask that would go on Steve's face. So all the brothers had to take turns pumping that bicycle every night, and our mother would just stand over us and make sure we're pumping it enough times. And sometimes she would leave the room and we would wait and see if he turned blue or not. Or she came in, we might kind of crimp the hose a little bit, see how that would go. It's always Chuck's idea when we did those things. Steve was quite a successful athlete growing up and playing Little League and etc. and in high school as well. He was an all-state high school basketball player. He won that particularly because of his performance in the state championship game at Hattiesburg High, where he was 10 for 10 from the free throw line in the 4th quarter of the state championship game against Warren Central. Isn't it a shame that people that can shoot free throws cannot coach people how to shoot? The reason he was 10 for 10 is that he got fouled a lot, and we were running a 4-corner stall, and Steve was in the middle of the stall, right? And we'd pass him the ball, and Coach Hurt would have Steve turn sideways, and other players could not see him. They kept running into him. Brilliant strategy. He was a standout on the baseball team as well. He was a first baseman and a catcher, so USM signed him as a pitcher. Actually, Steve was given a half basketball, half baseball scholarship to Southern Miss. That's the first time they'd ever done a scholarship that way. It is the last time they've ever done it. He combined with the current voice of the Golden Eagles, John Cox, who was also on that freshman basketball team. They combined for 5 points during that freshman year. All free throws, I'm sure. That put an end to the G. Clark era at USM. M.K. Turk came the next year and got to meet the team and quickly encouraged Steve to focus on baseball. So Pete Taylor turned him into a pitcher. Steve, until very recently, was the last pitcher at Southern Miss to throw a no-hitter. I think the first one since Ray Guy had thrown one, and Steve threw one when he was there against the North Park Middle School All-Stars. All 7 of us at that game were very proud. Now look, I am the only Knight brother who majored in coaching. So how surprised was I that William Carey gave him my job? It was available at the time. Of course, once he started coaching, none of his players were as surprised as anybody else that he was given that job. He was 25 years old. And so it began, right? In the distant past, it began. A coaching legend was being formed. The early years were interesting. Some incredible success. Lots of coats thrown across the floor. Quite an accumulation of both technical fouls and broken or dented chairs from time to time. There was Regina, always around, running the concession stand and being a big supporter of Steve's kids, growing up, running up and down that court cheering for him, and now grandkids doing the same thing, so the generations continue. Our Blessed Mother, there at many of the games. She, by the way, leads the state in attendance at all types of sporting events through the years for children and grandchildren. It's been a family thing in other ways. Chuck has been keeping the statistics for quite a few years for them. By the way, I had Chuck go and look up something for us. Steve, as some of you may know, injured his arm and was in a sling for a good part of this season So we wanted to compare if their field goal percentage changed when he could not be instructing them on how to shoot the basketball. And I heard it's about an 8% improvement, Chuck, this year. I'm gonna get the sling back out, see. Of course, Larry, who is being honored tonight as well, played baseball at William Carey and one year played for Steve. During this interesting experiment of trying to coach both baseball and basketball in 103 years of athletics, the only losing season the baseball team has had. Thank you, Bobby, for being around all this time. My job at the games back then was simply to make sure the officials understood when they had perhaps misjudged a rule interpretation, quietly help them to see the error of their ways. And that's become much more fun now that I can wear an Episcopal priest collar to the games. It really freaks out the referees a little bit. I remember this, and this is a true story. It was the year 1 or 2 of the Steve Knight era at William Carey, and they were playing Belhaven. And there was Coach Rugg coaching Belhaven, who'd been there since James Naismith took the bottoms of the peach baskets out. And I remember saying to Steve, you know, one day, that could be you. You could be the legend of the conference and the guy that's been around longer than everybody else. And Steve said, no way I'm going to stay here that long. But that has proven to be just the case. Somewhere, Steve, along the way, this professional baseball player who just wanted to teach kinesiology realized he was actually following his calling. He was using gifts given to him by God and using them at exactly the right place and the right time and with all the right people. That's what all of us want, I think, to know our gifts and use them. That's the only way to happiness, and folks, that's the only preaching I'm going to do for you tonight. My brother Steve is a legend. That's a weird thing to say, but y'all printed on those cards, so I have to say. Chuck and Don and Larry and I can discuss other ways that he is legendary. We won't do that. Of course, what he has done in victory totals is quite the accomplishment and deserving of all the honor and celebration, but as you've always heard from these fine folks that have been with him during this time, that's not the most important thing. If you could talk to more of his players, you would hear it over and over again from the players, hundreds of players now that he has coached, or at least for most of them. And I believe it to be true that if you play basketball for Steve Knight, you're going to leave a better basketball player than you came, but you will also certainly be a better man when you leave. So Steve, on behalf of your family, who had many other things they wanted me to say, I told a lot of 6 minutes. There really are no words that any of us can say of how proud we are of you. You have earned every bit of the praise you're hearing tonight. No one has ever outworked you. Lots of miles, lots of hours, lots of time in those gyms. And you are a blessing to everyone gathered here tonight, and many that could not be here. Just like you've been a blessing to countless young men, to their families, to the faculty and staff at your school, and the fans and supporters. I am really, really, really glad that William Carey took a chance on a 25-year-old graduate assistant and asked him to be their basketball coach. Lo, those many decades ago. But most of all, I'm really glad you said yes, and said yes, and said yes, and still say yes. Way to go, Bone. We are proud of you and we love you. Congratulations.